Okay, welcome everybody to this Sci-Chi webinar called Maximizing Your Research Potential as an Undergraduate, the Importance of Working with the Right Mentor. I'm Dr. John Edlund. One of the other organizers is Dr. Jordan Wagge. Why don't you introduce yourself and then we will move on.
Okay. I am Dr. Jordan Wagge. I'm an associate professor at Avila University in Kansas City. I have a PhD in experimental psychology. And in my lab, we study cognitive processes. Specifically, right now, we do a lot with food cognition. And then we also do a lot of work in replication. So I'm also involved with the Collaborative Replications and Education Project. And the purpose of that group is to address the need for replication in the field through student research. So that's kind of a neat line of research because we get to like dip our toes in lots of different things. And I'd say in my lab, I usually have around 10 students, undergrad and master's level. Master's level, I have both counseling and just MSP, Master's of Science in Psychology. And they, some of them are thesis students, some of them aren't. Some stay in my lab for a couple years, some just try it out. They have a variety of different career trajectories, so there isn't like one thing that defines who they are or what they're going to be doing. Yeah, and that's basically me.
Excellent. And our other participants, can you briefly introduce yourselves, your name, where you're at, and what you are doing?
Yeah, my name is Alicia Agbokou. I am a rising senior at the University of North Dakota. Right now, I work in a lab with a Sci-Chi member, Kelly, and she's actually the one who told me about this webinar, so thank you to Kelly. I think this past semester we've been working on a concussion study, so really just looking at how people view concussions, if they see it as serious, if there's a gender discrepancy there. And this summer, I'm actually going to be helping with a transcript on intermittent fasting. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Quentin?
Great. Yes. My name is Quentin Davis. I'm from Augusta University. I have a doctorate in experimental psychology and have had students working with me on a variety of different projects, including turn taking with young children in conversation and what students get out of research. And so a couple different directions of research as the mentor. Now I am the director for our Center for Undergraduate Research and Scholarship. And so I serve all of our colleges in the role of trying to match them with mentors, whether that's on the medical campus or the humanities or education and kinesiology and so forth. And so part of what I want to do is help the mentors be better mentors and do some professional development for both the student side and the mentor side.
Wonderful. And I suppose I should introduce myself more properly as well. I'm John Edlund. I'm the research director for Sci-Chi. I'm also an assistant professor of psychology at the Rochester Institute of Technology. My lab, I affectionately call the Smell Lab because I'm interested in social research, methods research, evolutionary research, as well as legal applications. So it was suggested that I call my lab the Smell Lab. I work most frequently with undergraduates, but RIT also happens to have two master's programs. We have a school psych program and a general experimental program. So I most frequently work with the undergrads, but I do occasionally work with master's students as well. Jordan, any chance you can describe the workings of your lab a little bit?
Sure. My lab, the actual physical space is just like a 8x10 room with a couple laptops in it, which is kind of fun. We meet once a week. Students who sign up generally sign up for 1 credit hour, although some of them can sign up for 2. We meet once a week and we have like an at-large lab meeting, and there's usually some kind of like plan for what we're going to do there. So people might be practicing presentations for a conference we're going to go to. We might work on building a poster. We might plan. I would say 90% of what we do involves planning. And planning is everything from like, hey, you know, let's all read the same paper and kind of generate ideas from it, to actually designing the study. It is kind of fun once we're able to like get at the action and actually collect data, but so much of what we do is planning. And we do a lot with open science too. So a lot of that is like pre-registration, power analyses, you know, writing like code or script for the types of things we're going to do. And people have a whole wide variety of expertise in those. So like one of the things I tell my students when they come in is like, if you have no idea what's happening, don't worry about it. I'm not really convinced that I know what's happening like 40% of the time. So it's not really like a linear process getting to know how to do research and becoming familiar with that. So, and then outside of that, we also collect a lot of data. We have a research participation requirement for our intro-psych students. So I'd say students spend, you know, about an hour and a half a week in meetings, probably about an hour and a half a week in like doing, and this is for a 1 credit hour, doing like maybe readings and, you know, checking Google Docs and stuff like that, and contributing, on responding to stuff on the Slack channel. And then generally I like them to spend an average of 1.5 to 2 hours a week running participants. I don't have them run participants into like finals or over the summer usually. Some people do more than that, and that's fine, but I try to make sure my lab can reasonably meet the need for people to have research training when they also have like jobs and they play sports and they have families and all that stuff. So that's pretty much the outline of how things work in my lab.
What about everybody else?
Well, in my lab, there's more of the it's not that time consuming, which is nice. We have, like I think Jordan said, weekly meetings that take about an hour, and then usually after that we'll have like an article to read. And this past semester there weren't, I think there were a lot of studies that people could have taken. So we didn't have that many participants to run, but outside of the actual physical lab, there was just like supplemental readings about what we were conducting, and then even questions about like making CVs or applying to grad school. Those were also brought up just in case we wanted to talk about that. So it was pretty at ease. I'd say the structure was, the lab meetings were like a must, but after that it was pretty go with the flow. So
What about you, Quentin? Let me describe my lab, how it works typically. We will have weekly lab group meetings. oftentimes there's an article that kind of underpins it. Sometimes there isn't. It really depends on where we are in the semester and what benefits the students most at that point. When I have a bunch of students in my lab that are all gearing up to apply for jobs or apply for grad school, we might spend the time entirely focused on getting ready for the grad school application process and the tips and tricks for that. And then in terms of running studies, it really depends on what's running in the lab. When we have more involved studies, it's sometimes retraining and recapping what happens, especially when there's studies that involve any degree of deception. We'll debrief the lab on how that's working frequently. I definitely find that leads to better data collection as the researcher, and I find it makes everybody feel more comfortable with the process as well. The next question is a two-parter. Who do you think should get involved in research, and how specifically should people get involved in research? Either how did you get involved, or how would you suggest students get involved?
So when I was an undergraduate and I learned that research was a thing you can do, I think I was actually a political science major, and I just really enjoyed it. So when I became a psychology major, I wanted to do that as well. And I went to sort of a mid-sized state school, Northern Kentucky University, go Norse. And actually, there were a lot of faculty members there who did research, but a lot of commuter students too. I was one. So it was really easy to get involved in research with a lot of different people. I would just approach them and say, like, hey, are you doing any research? And I ended up working in the neuroscience lab for a couple of years and had summer fellowships there, which is really nice. And that's where I did my undergrad thesis. My very first grant was a PsyChi grant for $768 to buy mice. I still have that on my CV, by the way, which is kind of nuts, but it was a really impactful experience, and I just really enjoyed the process of doing research. But I really just approached professors and said, hey, can I do research with you? And I think I had done well enough in their class and been committed enough that they were willing to take a gamble on me. Here at Avila, if you want to get involved in research, we guarantee a spot in the lab to anyone who wants to do research. They all fill out an application. And so we have that listed on our website. I think I have it listed on my website, where it's like a Word doc you fill out, which is like, when are you free? What are your interests? Which lab would you like to work in? And then we take that into consideration. We kind of pass those applications around the department and see like who needs people. Is there like a fit between their top choice and who needs people? Because really, I mean, I think we'll probably touch on this later, but it really doesn't matter. Like if you want to get a job doing research or go to grad school, I don't think it matters that much what kind of research you do. I mean, to a certain extent, it probably does, but like, the more skills you're learning in general around research, the better. At a certain point, it's just about like, do you have experience doing any research at all? Like, can you do an IRB? Can you present at a conference? Stuff like that. And the people, this is a point that I try to make to students when I we go and advertise in their orientation seminar in the psych major, like, come join a lab. I think there's kind of a block there where like some people don't think they're like the quote unquote, like the kind of person who does research. And I want everybody in my lab. I want people with vastly different perspectives. I just want anybody who thinks research sounds interesting. And the point that I try to make, we have a lot of like first generation students here. The point I try to make it to them is, if you are the kind of person who, like, you're thinking to yourself, I'm not a researcher, please join the lab. Because you're exactly the kind of person who we want. Like, for me, it was very easy to like approach professors and and assume they take a chance on me. And I don't know that a lot of people come from that starting place.
Wonderful. In terms of my lab and my experiences, I actually stumbled into doing research kind of as a happenstance. I had 5 majors as an undergrad between an associate's degree and a bachelor's degree. And I came to psych kind of late in the game. And the only reason I started looking at research in psychology was I had to do an honors thesis for the honors program, which meant I had to go talk to a faculty member and get involved in research to satisfy that requirement. And where I went for undergrad, not a ton of people get involved in research labs, especially not transfers. So I kind of got lucky that I was part of the honors program, and it helped me get involved in the research process because I had to. Otherwise, I would have missed that opportunity. At RIT, how we get involved is how we have students get involved is very different than Avila. Here, it's not nearly as standardized. While we talk with our freshmen about getting involved in research, it seems like that gets missed, and it's a missed opportunity until we get to a junior, sometimes senior level. And once students are seniors, certainly getting involved in research is valuable, but it tends to be, in some ways, a little on the late side for the maximum benefit. Faculty tend to make connections with students and will refer students to other faculty based on the student interest. But I also definitely agree with Jordan that for grad school applications, the specific interest and the specific experience isn't critical. In fact, as a faculty member have been considering grad school applications, I am in many ways the most intrigued by people who are not the standard social psychologists that I am. I've had people work with me who come from a behavioral background and a biology background, and the diversity of knowledge I find to be particularly valuable for designing good research. So specific background, I think, is not critical. It's more of the interest in research and wanting to be involved in research that's the most important. And I've already kind of tapped into what my next question to everybody is going to be is, when should you get involved in research?
Yeah, I'll chime in here. I realized that my mute button was on, so sorry about that. But I agree that being a senior is a little bit late. We would never turn anybody away because of that alone, but a lot of times faculty members, what we find is that they would prefer someone who's younger so that their time in training is maximized. As a mentor myself, I would only accept people if they could commit for a year, because the intensity of the training was so great that you know, if they stayed in for a semester and then left, a lot of that work was lost in terms of moving the data forward. So I like the idea and promote the idea of younger students getting involved.
Jordan?
Yeah. I mean, this is, you know, yeah, earlier is always better, but I'll take somebody in their last semester. I think in particular at my institution, I think sometimes people don't realize that they like research or they even want to do it until it's late in the game. We also have a lot of transfer students here too, so I'm like, kind of used to having students for not that long, and the benefit of the area of research that I work in, particularly replication, is like somebody can come to that pretty late, and pick up kind of what they need to know from the stats and methods classes that I teach, and like still be able to contribute and get some training. At the same time, I mean, I have, this is just something to think about. I have a student in my lab who I've had since, I think, her freshman year. And the letter that I'm going to be able to write her when she does whatever she does next is going to be amazing. It's going to be, and what makes a letter amazing is really the specific examples you can speak to of things they do. So like, you know, a bad letter for somebody is a letter that says, yeah, this person was in my class and they did well. That's a bad letter. A good letter is like the person is diligent, and these are the 4 examples, and the person is committed, and these are the examples, and the person is, you know, interested in sort of doing all of these other things. And like I can pull from my experience with her and be able to write her this letter, but she also has a lot of training. And even if she doesn't end up in research, like she's got some project management stuff under her belt. She knows how to work in a team really well. So more is always better. But like if you're, you know, if you're listening to this and you're a senior and you're like, oh my gosh, I think I might want to do research for a career or go to a doctoral program, just try to make it happen and try to maximize that time. And there may be, you know, the lab where I did my PhD, that wouldn't be a thing that happened because the background knowledge in that lab is so extensive, it wouldn't have made sense. But I think in a lab like mine, where I have the kind of topics we study, that would work. And you could, at the very least, collect data or be a coder of some kind. And so if one person turns you down, like just keep looking. And if nobody at your institution will take you, like contact somebody at a nearby institution and say, like, can I volunteer in your lab? Yeah.
I think you're hitting the nail right on the head, is that there's always a chance to be involved in research. I know, depending on the institution you reach out to, getting involved in a research lab when you're not a student can sometimes be challenging. I've had local students who want to participate in my lab that I've had to say no to because of institutional policies, but that is certainly, there are ways for people to be involved in research no matter where you are in the career path. So how important is it to be involved in research that's exactly like you want to do for your career? How often do people pivot?
Yeah, I think, oh, sorry.
That's okay, go ahead.
And I'm really interested to hear what Quentin has to say about this too, because of the specific role she has. I mean, like, again, my impression is that it doesn't matter that much. Like, I worked in a neuroscience lab as an undergrad and a psychophysics lab as a PhD student and do different stuff now. I really think the most important thing is going to be your skills. Like, or do you work in a lab where you do things like pre-registration and power analysis? Do you present at conferences? Do you have any coding skills? So not just SPSS, but like R and Python. Those are going to be, I think, I would rather, if I were accepting students to a doc program, I would rather have somebody that could code than somebody who had like studied the exact same research questions that I was interested in studying. Like, certainly they should be interested in the research questions I'm in, but I don't know that they have to have an extensive background in it.
I would completely agree. I think that, and especially because I work with students all across the college, whether it's psychology or medicine or pre-med or whatever, they do change their mind. And the fact is that regardless, or maybe I shouldn't say the facts, but there is plenty of research to support the notion that students get these broader skills. And it's those skills that are being applied, whether it is a statistical package, even if it's not the same statistical package, the fact that you've had an experience learning one will make it easier to learn another one, even if you haven't had specific experience with the programs or what have you that that your grad program might offer or require. So those team-based skills, the communication and presenting, those are highly generalizable to other situations and different topics.
Alicia, how did it happen for you as a current undergraduate?
Well, I think it was most definitely like a peer. So you'll hear by word of mouth, like so-and-so is working in this professor's research lab. And for me personally, I like gravitate towards professors that I think can teach me more than what they teach me in a classroom. So Kelly she's a graduate student right now, and I really liked her teaching style, and I also felt that as if she would push me if need be. So that's why I asked her personally if she needed like a research assistant. And that's how I got involved. But I know that my roommate, who is also going to be a junior next semester, she asked me personally if I enjoyed research, and I told her yes, and then that's how she got involved. So I think it's a lot to do with like your peers and what they're engaging in and what they find to be helpful and worthwhile. And then definitely like if you like a professor enough, you will want to work with them more, especially like more hands-on. So that's a big factor as well.
And Alicia, before we move on to other people, I actually want to start my next question with you. What kind of time commitments should an undergraduate expect in working in a lab?
I feel as if this isn't really a lot of time, but the biggest time commitment that you'll have is the weekly meetings. And they're actually like every other week. So on Fridays, you'll meet for an hour, and it really just depends on the demands of the research lab itself and what you're doing. So say if the end of the semester is coming up and you're studying for finals, then research lab will essentially just be like a quick check-in to see how everyone's doing, if everyone has any questions, and then it'll be done, because they usually understand like the time that you're putting into your schoolwork or even just regular jobs that you have. But besides that, I think it was about an hour to an hour and a half per study. So if you have a couple of participants a week, that would be up to like 6 hours. But they would be spread out across the different research assistants that were in the lab, which was really helpful. Personally, it wasn't as big of a time commitment as I thought it would be. It was more just scheduling, making sure that you're available when you say you are, and then they'll only schedule you in those time confines. And then outside of that, it was really up to you if you wanted to run more participants, if you had extra time that week. And if you didn't have any time that week, you could let the you can let your research supervisor know, and they would be completely okay with that. So it didn't take up too much time, but it was worthwhile gaining the skills that you would need to potentially run your own study one day. So I thought it was definitely worth the time that it took.
Quentin?
Sure. You're going to have to remind me, is this about how I got started, or tell me the question again? I forgot it.
In your lab, about what would the time expectations that an undergraduate might
Right. They are the same. Well, it sort of depends. I guess I should go back to that answer. And again, I can speak kind of to my my own lab, and then also kind of the breadth of labs across our campus. In general, if a student is taking research credit, so we have classes that are variable credit at the 2,000, 3,000, and 4,000 level. And so generally 1 credit of research would count for 3 hours of contact time per week. And so that's the underlying formula. A 3-hour credit would be about 9 or 10 hours in the lab or in the doing that work, regardless of where that occurs. That said, some faculty mentors are fine with including readings in that time, and some are some expect you to do the readings outside of those contact hours. I definitely encourage faculty and students to have a syllabus so that they're clear what those expectations are. For me, I pretty well stuck to the algorithm of 3 hours per credit. If a student is volunteering, then I've kind of worked with them based on their schedule. So it was very, very different according to the particular student, and so that depends too. But I've taken students for anywhere from about 3 hours to 10 hours a week.
I think it depends is always the right answer. It's one of the things I tell my students at RIT is you can always on a test or in class say it depends, but then you have to justify exactly what it depends on. Jordan, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think I already kind of covered what it looks like to work in my lab, and I mean, again, like it really depends on what week it is. It's like, well, if we're going to a conference, then it's going to be a lot of work because we have to put the poster together. You have to practice it and all that stuff. But yeah, I try to stick pretty close to that 3 hour as well as I can. People can certainly work more. I try to get a feel for everybody's individual needs a little bit like when they come into the lab, in terms of like how many extra hours they have during the week. Because what I personally don't want to do as a mentor is kind of withhold opportunities from somebody because they have to work full time or have a family. So I like to be pretty to the extent that we can work together, like sit down and talk to them when they come into the lab and figure out, like, okay, what do you really want to get out of this? Do you want to learn how to run participants? Like, these are my needs. Let's find some middle ground in terms of, why you're here. Do you just kind of, yeah. But it ranges during the semester, especially for thesis students, anywhere between, some hours there's nothing to, or some weeks there's nothing to do, and some weeks there's 10 hours worth of stuff to do. But I try to be sensitive to the commitments they have outside of that.
Awesome.
I think that makes such good sense, because students now really have so many different levels of commitment and responsibility outside of school. Jordan, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
When you sit down and have that initial conversation with a student as you're trying to navigate their time and what they want to get out, do you have a set list of questions that you go through with students?
No, I wish I did.
I was hoping your answer would be yes.
I mean, generally I don't. It's not even really like a formal thing. I mean, sometimes it's a 5-minute conversation that happens after class one day when in stats and methods, and I'm like, by the way, if you enjoyed today's topic, you may want to consider doing science. And they'll stay after class and we'll have a quick conversation of like, do you want to do research? How much of a commitment can you make? But I try to get it. I mean, no, there's nothing sort of formal. I think the one question I ask is like, why, of everybody's like, why do you want to be involved with, and in fact, that's on our application. Why do you want to be involved in research? Because I want to get a sense of like, do they want to leave just with experience in general, or do they want to have skills running participants? I'm certainly, if anybody listening has a set of questions they routinely ask, I would definitely love to see them.
Me too.
So now we're going to move on to the last formal question that I have, and the question is what are the best and or worst, i.e., what's the most interesting experiences you've had with mentoring and undergraduates?
I think I wouldn't say that any experiences are necessarily bad, but I think when I have students who aren't reliable and don't communicate, that's really hard. And I don't mind texting with my lab students, but if it takes me a couple days to get in touch with them, that's really hard because stuff can move really fast. And I'd say the other thing that's really difficult for me, because of my style, is when I have a student in lab who's sort of not self-directed, at least a little bit. So like in class, I don't mind answering the same question over and over and over again, because like I'm in that setting, I see myself as like the teacher, right? But if I have a student who like comes to me every time they could Google a question, it's really tough. And if I don't have them reminding me like this needs to get done on my project and this needs to get done on my project, I have a hard time. So I have a hard time, I think, with my style, and maybe Quentin could help me with this. I don't know, but my personal style is like very sort of scatterbrained, and I need students to take a little bit of a lead and a little bit of responsibility in lab, and sort of jump in and do things without waiting to be told exactly what to do all the time. And my best experiences, I think, are when I have students who are just excited. Like they're interested in what they're doing. They listen, they read, they look stuff up on their own. And they just have fun. Like they don't see it as a box they have to check to get somewhere. They see it as like sort of they're enjoying what they're doing and they're engaged and they're present. Because for me, like I'm a step on their way, right? But for me, this is my life. I stay here even after they're gone, and I like them to be present for that.
Alicia, what's been your best experience so far as a researcher?
I think it would have to be coming up with new research opportunities for the next semester, and definitely getting involved with the professors that I work under and what their next step is. So right now I am doing a lot of reading for a research project that's coming up for the fall semester with intermittent fasting. And I think just looking at all the material that they have out there and seeing how it can relate to what we're going to be doing is really fun. But yeah, pretty much just coming up with research and feeling like I am doing my part in that is probably the best.
Quentin?
Yeah, I resonate with a lot of what both Alicia and Jordan said. Having a student that kind of shows up and you don't even know that they're in the lab and you walk in and they've been at it, that's such a thrill. And so I love having those students too. And I have no help for you, Jordan, in terms of being I'm also a scattered kind of leader, and so I love having a student that does help me organize. Those are some of the best experiences, and having those students really take ownership of the lab, that is just such a great feeling, and it makes everything go so smooth when you feel like you have a teammate to kind of help you along. And I also really appreciate the sentiment of that we are steps along their way. On the kind of to that end, I had a student just this week send me a text that, you know, was speaking about our time together in the lab and what a meaningful part of her background that was as she moves on in her career. So those are those golden moments that you get. I guess on the other side, the tough things are when there is a time crunch. For example, of trying to get a poster in, to the printer before we go off to a conference or something, and someone not pulling their weight, and when students are really having difficulty with each other, and not wanting to step on toes, and maybe something about why a student isn't pulling his or her weight that's a personal difficulty. Those can be really tough places to be in as a mentor, so that other students don't feel left out or like they're doing more and you can't really break confidentiality. Those, it's real life, it's messy, and sometimes navigating those kinds of pieces, even though you've got a timeline to meet, that can be some of the tougher parts.
Yeah, that is an extremely good point. And especially, I mean, people have lives and they have crises and stuff like that. And I'm like really close to putting this in my syllabus of just saying, like, look, if you look around and you see somebody else doing less, don't assume that perception is true. Like, don't make assumptions about why they're not in lab meetings or why they're not running participants. Like, trust me that I'm managing my lab and that I'm doing it in a way that I feel is fair, and just kind of stay focused on what you're doing. Like, certainly if you're supposed to do a project with somebody and they're not holding up their end of the bargain, like, bring me in on that. But just don't be looking around and comparing yourself. I think that's a good tone to set in academia in general, of like, don't be comparing yourself and making assumptions about what the person next to you is doing or not doing.
Jordan, that is such an important point, because life happens, and in this most recent semester I've had students who have family die, and when that happens, sometimes they share it and they want it to be known widely, and other times they let me know, and that is as far as they want anybody to go. And you'll never know what kind of potential health issues, personal issues people are experiencing. And certainly for me as a mentor, just getting enough so I can contextualize is all I need. and sometimes when students feel like they want to or should share more, I'm certainly that. I just think the communication and just recognizing life happens. And sometimes I think academics forget about that life happens. Um, Certainly for me, some of my best experiences have been having students just come into a project and look at it with fresh eyes. Like my master's thesis, which was really like the second project I ever ran for real in my life, I was training one of the teammates, and he asked several very good and very pointed questions about how we were doing things. And I went to my thesis advisor. I'm like, hey, Brian had these observations. They seem pretty valid. Can we make these changes moving on? And ultimately, the undergrad who was just getting trained in and spoke up, he ended up a co-author on the eventual publication because he truly made the study better by coming in with that outsider's perspective and making things better. I've also been very fortunate over the years to have undergraduates I've worked with continue to stay in touch. Some of them are academics, some of them are working for not-for-profits or other jobs, and it's been really great seeing the development even after they're gone from the lab. Any other general thoughts in terms of finding and working with the right mentor?
I mean, and it kind of depends. Well, there's working for a mentor when you're an undergrad, and then there's like, what do you want to look for in a grad school mentor? Do you think that's worth touching on a little bit?
Absolutely.
I mean, like one thing I would say is just that's sort of overwhelming. I think it's just labs look different everywhere. So you may be used to doing things one way in one lab you're in, and expect it to go that way when you're a grad student, and it's just very different. It depends on the mentor. It depends on the I've talked to people who as undergrads like barely ever even talked to the PI in the lab they were working in. It was all postdocs or PhD students. And there's just a real variety, but I really think fit is important when you are talking about like what you're looking for in a mentor. It's really hard to get an idea of fit when you aren't around a person. But this is, I think, one of the ways sort of modern technology is really helpful. And fit in terms of like what they expect from their students, like go and see if the person you might want to work with is on Twitter and see what kinds of things they're tweeting. If they are like, I have students who are really into open science, it's important to them. And if they go on Twitter and they see that somebody is also really into that, if they have a page on the open science framework, like that's good. If they tweet things that are kind of snarky about students, like consider whether that's going to be the kind of environment that you want to work in. If you want to work a little bit more independently, maybe somebody who doesn't spend a lot of time with their grad students is fine. If you want to work closely with somebody, ask the other grad students in the lab where you want to go work, how much time do you spend with your advisor per week on average? How hands-on are they? And really, I think try to take advantage of that modern technology as much as you can and try to get a sense for the person. They may be in like professional Facebook groups that you're in or could join. So you can kind of get a sense for how they approach problems and whether you could learn a lot from them. that technology breaks down a lot of barriers that I think were there 10 years ago that aren't there anymore.
I think that's great advice. As a graduate student, as a master's student, I was told by other students, don't work with this professor. And I kind of took that as a challenge, and I guess that's part of my own personality, which I should have learned from better, but I was stubborn and really didn't listen to a lot of the comments that other students were telling me, and I thought that I really had, I guess, a naive, looking back, I had a very naive way of considering that advice, and really thought, well, but you all do such a great job. I want to be like you, so why wouldn't I go to work with that person? And eventually had some rough experiences, and I do think that talking to other students or looking, I love the idea of looking on Twitter and other social media that might give you a sense of who they are. That is so important. If you do get into a relationship that with a mentor that feels like they're taking advantage or not spending enough time with you the way that you want, or are too micromanaging on the other end, then I think having the strength and confidence to go seek out a different mentor is really important, because you don't want to be stuck in a situation, because the longer that you stay, it gets harder to leave. And so just knowing that there are other mentors out there and people that you can kind of lean on to talk that through is important. So, but doing that homework ahead of time, if possible, is really, I think, some of the best advice that you could get. Talk to current grad students, email them, ask a department for the names and emails of students that are currently working under that person. They can be a great resource for what it's really like on a day-to-day basis, what the expectations are like from that professor and so forth.
That is certainly the biggest piece of advice I give my undergraduates when they're applying to different universities and they're getting acceptances, is that they need to talk to some of the current grad students, because I have never in my life met a grad student that won't tell another student, a grad student or an undergraduate, the way things really are. Like, grad students are very honest, they're very forthright, they'll give you the unvarnished perspective, and I think that's certainly something that is very, very important. Some of the grad students that came to my grad program when I was a grad student had come from other universities in toxic environments, and I was very, very fortunate where I went to grad school that kind of toxic environment wouldn't be tolerated. But some people, some programs really thrive on competitiveness and challenging, and some people do really well. That would not have been my best environment, but it is the right environment for some people. And I think knowing yourself and knowing what you're getting into is really important. Wonderful. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for being involved in this webinar, the Maximizing Your Research Potential as an Undergraduate, the importance of working with the right mentor. I hope those of you listening to this find it valuable, and certainly I know myself and the other presenters are likely to happily answer any further questions you have.
Absolutely.
Yes, agreed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.
Great to meet you.
Okay.